A lawyer arrives at a special detention center in the United States to meet his client. Zeller is a death row inmate under strict supervision, but he doesn't look like a vicious criminal at all. Zeller was surprised by the lawyer's arrival, since the lawyer was somewhat well-known locally, and yet he was willing to defend a so-called murderous demon. Strangely, the lawyer waived his fee. If Zeller's story was interesting enough, he would take the story rights as payment. Zeller paused for a moment, then began to recount what had happened. He once worked at the 511 Biological Research Center. The center conducted biological experiments, but secretly researched supernatural phenomena. 6 months ago, Professor Lauren, an expert in quantum physics, discovered a wormhole on Earth. However, during the investigation, a level 4 alarm suddenly went off at the research center. At that time, Zeller, a female colleague, and the head of the security team were preparing to evacuate urgently as instructed, but Professor Lauren was nowhere to be seen.
You can't just leave her here to die.
Well, for all we know, she's already dead. The alert went off in her sector.
This isn't a quarantine, it's an evac. I got an idea. You're head of security, why don't you go find out?
Okay.
Even though the captain didn't get along with Zeller, this was still his responsibility. After saying goodbye to his colleague, he rushed to the lab. The rescue team wouldn't arrive for another 30 minutes, so all Zeller and his colleague could do was wait. Not long after, the communicator suddenly started ringing. The colleague thought it was Dr. Lauren calling, but Zeller sensed that what was coming through wasn't a voice, but some kind of vibration frequency. The next second, the walls around them suddenly became hazy and indistinct, as if something was seeping in from the void. Zeller immediately pulled his colleague into the next room to hide, but the situation there was exactly the same.
Stay away from the walls.
As the lights suddenly went out, the colleague's terrified screams echoed in the darkness. Meanwhile, on his way to the lab, the captain unexpectedly ran into Professor Lauren. Lauren accused the captain of not evacuating everyone as quickly as possible. However, when he learned that Zeller was also there, his attitude suddenly changed, and he followed the captain to the evacuation point. But when they arrived, all they saw were pieces of their colleague, and Zeller holding an axe. Zeller told the captain and Professor Lauren that he saw something crawling out of the walls, but he was powerless to stop it. Hearing Zeller's account, the lawyer immediately had an idea. He could use insanity as a defense, and the judge would reduce his sentence because of it. When Zeller heard this, he couldn't help but praise the lawyer's professionalism, but there was just one thing he couldn't agree with. His mind was perfectly sane.
Then you're a cold-blooded killer.
Demons exist. Counselor, they're on the way. There's nothing them.
At that time, the captain tied him up to take him back to face legal trial. However, Zeller kept repeating the captain shouldn't kill him, but the thing that crawled out of the wall. He insisted he didn't split open their colleague, but those things had torn her apart. The surveillance footage could prove him right. At Zeller's request, Professor Lauren decided to check the surveillance footage. Before leaving, he reminded the captain,
Anything happens to Mr. Zeller while I'm gone, you'll be the one that fries.
Not long after, Professor Lauren returned to the lab. He pulled up the surveillance footage from earlier and discovered that things were exactly as Zeller had said. Countless tentacles reached out from the wall and easily tore the colleague's body apart. Watching these scenes, Professor Lauren suddenly showed a strange smile, then quickly deleted all the surveillance data and returned to the evacuation point.
Tell him, Trollenberg, tell him what you saw, didn't you?
Monster. Just like you said. An all too human one. He killed her.
What?
I watched him do it.
Ignoring Professor Lauren's attempts to stop him, the captain raised his gun to execute Zeller, but it jammed at the crucial moment. To protect himself, Zeller had to swing the axe again. He couldn't understand why Professor Lauren lied, since the surveillance clearly recorded everything. To prove his innocence, Zeller planned to take Professor Lauren back to the lab. By this time, the rescue team had already arrived, but Zeller discovered that the surveillance footage had been deleted, leaving only the part where he took out the captain. Now he really had no way to defend himself. Suddenly, Zeller realized that Professor Lauren's goal might not have been to frame him, but rather to hide something else. But Professor Lauren told him that doomsday was about to arrive, and humanity's evil deeds had already led to a tragic end.
What did you really find on that expedition?
The truth, son. A truth mankind isn't ready to bear.
6 months ago, a spy satellite detected a hollow space in the Arctic glacier. Professor Lauren led a scientific team there, but out of 6 people, only 1 survived. He discovered that the hollow was actually an ancient cave, inside which there was a skeleton of an unknown creature and a strange ancient flute. Afterwards, some of the things the professor saw made him firmly believe that the end of the world was coming.
The old ones, as I like to call them, gifted us with the land, the sea, the air, and we pillaged it. They despise us for what we've done, but soon, very soon, what we are will be obsolete, and the earth will be a raging sea once more.
Professor Lauren took out the bone flute he had found. The sound it made could distort space and time, opening a gateway to another world.
What did you see? Tell me!
The wrath of God.
That thing I saw was not a god.
As Professor Lauren played the bone flute, the space around them once again became distorted and unreal, just like before.
Make it stop!
Zeller ordered him to stop, but the professor showed no intention of stopping. As the bone flute extended 8 tentacles, the space grew increasingly unstable. With no other choice, Zeller swung his axe once again. At that moment, the rescue team arrived just in time and witnessed what he was doing. Hearing this story, the lawyer decided,
So let me see if I have this straight. Trollenberg summons a race of creatures from the ancient past through a wormhole by way of a flute-like instrument no human being can hear.
Jeez, it sounds nuts when you say it like that.
Zeller told the lawyer that while things were indeed as he said, there was one thing he got wrong. After Professor Lauren activated the bone flute, what he saw was not the past, but the future.
Your new bestseller. You're so screwed, put a fork.
Seeing Zeller's crazed expression, the lawyer became even more convinced that he was a deranged serial killer. A month later, it was time for Zeller's execution, because he had given up pleading not guilty by reason of insanity. But before it began, the governor approved his final request, which was to see the bone flute one last time.
Here's an oldie but a goodie. Something for the fans in the cheap seats to remember me by.
Under the lawyer's confused gaze, Zeller played the bone flute. In the next second, the space warped again, and the bone flute slowly floated into the air, extending 8 slender tentacles. Since no one tried to stop it, the summoning ritual was completed successfully. Then, to the lawyer's horror, they saw behind them a yes. It turned out everything Junpei said was true, but by then, it was already too late. No one could stop the spirit that the Chosen One had summoned. Zeller saw Lauren arrive through the wormhole. It turned out that Professor Lauren had seen the ending from the very beginning, and everything he did was to bring about this outcome. At this moment, the lawyer was lifted by the tentacles, as Zeller had been. His book on Zeller's warnings fell. Though published long ago, no one believed them.